Hey, what's up guys, and welcome to 61 Riftblade, one of the most powerful and versatile warrior specs currently. Riftblade has a ton of options for DPS, allowing you to do excellent single target damage, fantastic cleave damage, and some pretty awesome AoE damage as well. Riftblade is a spec I would highly recommend that you learn, as it's very rewarding and works well on most of the current Nightmare type content. So let's go ahead and take a look. Looking at the soul tree breakdown, you'll see we put the full 61 points in Riftblade. That is, of course, because we have a lot of skills at the bottom of the tree here that are extremely important to Riftblade's DPS, such as Burst Synergy and Blade of the Ascended. For the secondary soul, we go 15 in Reaver. That allows us to pick up 5 in Tropic Embrace for a 10% non-physical damage increase, 5 in Shadow Strength for a 10% strength increase, and 5 in Plague Grip to increase your attack power and weapon damage by 10%. As a bonus for going in Reaver, we also pick up Dire Corruption, which is an extremely strong damage over time ability, and also Soul Sickness, which again is another extremely strong damage over time ability. And also we pick up Binding of Affliction, which increases the damage of non-physical attacks by an additional 5%. For the 0-point soul, we're going to pick up Zero in Tempest, which allows us to pick up Shock Pulse, which is really nice for disconnects, but also Enhanced Conductivity, which is a buff that increases your damage by 2%. So that's it for the souls, guys. For the Masteries, level 61, we take Resonating Strikes. This is going to allow your critical hits to apply a 3% maximum health absorb shield to you once every 6 seconds, so that's a pretty big deal. Level 62, Steadfast Soul. The main thing this does for us is reduces the cooldown of Burst Synergy by 30 seconds. Burst Synergy is going to be an extremely strong cooldown that you get. It's usually a minute, but gets reduced to 30 seconds. Moving on up to level 63, Energy Reserves. This is going to allow damaging abilities to have a 33% chance to restore 4 of your energy, but more importantly, it's going to increase the number of avatar buffs you can have active by 1. So instead of having 1 active, you can have 2 active, but we'll discuss this more here shortly. Level 64, there is some controversy regarding which one of these masteries is the best, Deliberate Strikes or Precision Strikes. However, Deliberate Strikes I feel is a little bit easier to play and pulls very, very competitive numbers as well. So that's the version I'll be showing you today, is Deliberate Strikes. And what this guy's going to do is allow your single target attacks to put a stack of Building Rage on your target. After 8 seconds, the Building Rage explodes, dealing quite a bit of damage. So this is a huge single target damage increase. Moving up to level 65, we take Power Manipulation for the single target damage increase that it provides. Alternatively, if you're using this for heavy cleave with like 4 or 5 targets, or you're using it for strictly AoE, you can swap over to Power Variation and get a really strong AoE damage cooldown with it. So that's it for the Souls and Masteries, guys. Now let's go ahead and discuss macros. So I use quite a few, starting up here at the top macro here. This is the single target macro. It's going to be on my 1 key. You'll notice that I use a couple shift modifiers in here for the finishers. So how this works is if I hit my 1 key, it'll start at this line right here and cast Riff Strike, which is this ability here. If I hold my shift button down and then hit my 1 key, it'll fire off Fiery Burst, which is on a 15-second cooldown. And if I do it again, after 3 more attack points, it'll fire off Icy Burst, which is this guy right here and this guy right here, which are both finishers. I'll explain how to use this in rotation section, but by all means, if you're not comfortable at managing your finishers this way, you can move out these lines to another macro and put it on your bar somewhere if you like. Moving on down, we have the Area of Effect macro here, kind of similar as the single target macro. It'll start at this line here. So this macro is on my 2 key. If I hit my 2 key, it'll start off by casting Dire Corruption, and then of course Rift Spear, Stonespear on down. But if I hit Shift and then hit my 2 key, it'll fire off Storm Burst or Earth Burst, depending on which one is off cooldown. Something else you'll notice at the top here is we have a Cast Not Active fork. The Not Active modifier here is how you can enable abilities that are toggleable automatically. So you just got to make sure that if you use your AoE macro and then you're swapping back to your single target, though, you want to untoggle fork, because you typically don't want to have the cancel buff fork in your single target macro, because you may be using that in a cleave situation. But I'll explain more about this in the rotation section. Moving on down, we have a simple damage over time macro. This simply just has Flamespear, which is going to be on a 4-second cooldown, and Soul Sickness. This is mostly going to be used for the single target section, but also some in the AoE and cleave sections as well. Moving on down, we have a single target burst macro. This is going to have your burst synergy at the top, followed by Riff Burst, which is an extremely strong finisher that you get. It deals a lot of damage. Moving on down, we have the Area of Effect cooldown macro, which is going to have your burst synergy in it again, and then it's going to have Storm Burst and Earth Burst in it, depending on which one you're going to be using. Moving up to the top, we have the Preload Macro. This is specifically used so that you can preload that 20% non-physical damage increase that you get from just using a burst. So what you'll do is you'll typically preload your 3 attack points before a fight, and you'll use this before you start your rotation. But again, I'll talk more about this in a little bit. And then of course we have the standard cast itself power manipulation line there that'll cast this before the fight starts, so you can be all set and ready to go. Moving on down, we have just a simple gap closer macro. This is going to have your Rift Walk on it, which teleports you to behind the enemy and also your Rift Travel, which teleports to the target's location. So pretty straightforward stuff there. But that's it for the macros, guys. Now let's go ahead and talk about the action bar. So starting at the top left here, you can see we have just a few buffs, and we also have a lot of buffs up here. I'll go ahead and get rid of these really quick so I can show you how this works. So because you have Blade of the Ascended, which if you remember was the 61 point ability for Riftblade, you can hit that and it will apply all 4 of these buffs to you. So Blade of the Ascended is pretty huge. It reduces the power cost of non-physical finishers by 2 and increases the damage of Riftblade abilities by 30%. Pretty huge stuff there. Blade of Elemental Affinity, builders have a 25% chance to heal the warrior 20% of your attack power. That's pretty huge as well. A lot of self-healing there. Planar Blade is going to allow abilities to a 25% chance to refresh Rift Walk and Rift Travel, which are your gap closers down here, if you remember. But more importantly, it's going to increase the damage of Riftblade attacks by 10%. And then of course we have Stormblade, which allows a 25% chance to deal an extra 2300 damage. So pretty good stuff there. So coming over here to the right, you'll see we have a couple avatar buffs. If you remember from the mastery we chose, we can now have 2 active. So the main one you're going to always want to have active is Avatar of the Rift, which enhances elemental ability damage by 25%, in addition to reducing the power cost of an elemental builders by 2. So a lot of power cost reduction in this build. So moving over to the right, we have Avatar of Water and Avatar of Wind. Now Avatar of Water is going to reduce the damage you take by a flat 10%. This can be really powerful, especially in progression content and stuff, because it'll really help your healers out. However, if you're doing farm bosses or you're not having any issues dying or taking too much damage, I recommend that you choose Avatar of Wind instead, which increases your dodge by 3%, but also more importantly, increases your movement speed by 16%. Moving over to the right, we have Binding of Affliction from the Reaver tree. This increases damage of non-physical attacks by 5%. And we have the 0-point Tempest ability, Enhanced Conductivity, which increases your damage by 2%. And then of course we have the Fork Toggle ability here, which will simply allow your spear abilities to hit 5 enemies but deal 50% less damage. So this guy right here, like Stonespear, does about 30k, but if you toggle on Fork, it does 20k, but now it deals it to 5 different enemies. So you can see how that would be a DPS gain in multi-target environments. Over to the right here, we have 8 different skills here. This is simply just so I can show you the tooltips. I might go over them a little bit later and show you what they look like, but not too terribly important right now. You don't have to put those on your bar. Down in the middle here, we have the Rift Burst on the Z key. We don't ever use it from here. We only use it from the Q key. So this guy is just here so I can see what the tooltip is and show you the tooltip. On the Q key, we have the single target burst macro, which has burst synergy followed by Rift Burst in it. On the E keybind, we have Frost Strike, which is going to be a really important skill because it increases elemental damage by 30%. On R key, we have the AoE Burst macro, which is going to have burst synergy and also Storm Burst and Earth Burst in it. On this key right here, we have Icy Burst, which is the Icy Burst macro rather. It's going to have Icy Burst in it for preloading, and it's going to have power manipulation, because with a burst, when you cast a burst ability, it increases your non-physical damage by 20% for 6 seconds. So this is going to be really awesome for when you first start fights. Moving on down to the main bar, we have the Rift Strike macro here. This is going to be your single target macro with your single target finishers in it, which is going to have your Icy Burst, Fiery Burst, and then moving on down to the AoE macro, we have your Rift Spear here at the top, so you can see when that's off cooldown, particularly for Cleave situations. But you can also cast your AoE abilities of Storm Burst and Earth Burst with it by holding down your Shift key when you hit it. On your 3 key, we have Flamespear. This is a really strong damage over time ability, but we also have Soul Sickness packaged in with it, so you can tap this twice to refresh both of those. On 4, we have Riff Storm, which is a really strong damage over time AoE ability. It's typically only going to be used for AoE environments. It is because the main difference between Rift Storm and your other abilities that you have is 1, it's not a burst, but it looks like it because it's a finisher just like the other ones. And 2, Rift Storm is on global cooldown, whereas Storm Burst and Earth Burst are both off global cooldown, which means you can cast these without using a global cooldown. Whereas this guy, you need a full 1.5 second, just like all your other abilities, to cast. And I'll explain more about this in the rotation section. Moving over to the 5 key, we have Power Variation. Currently I don't have this selected, but if you are using this for a strictly AoE environment, it is worth it to swap to Power Variation for that trash clear or whatever you're working on. On the 7 key, we have Stone Shield. This is just going to be your standard shield. On 8, we have Riff Walk, which teleports to behind the enemy, which is also pre-packaged in with this gap closing macro here with Rift Travel. On 9, we have Rift Barrage, which is a 8 enemy stun for 3 seconds on a 60-second cooldown. On the 0 key, or my middle click key, we have Wind Spear, which is just your standard interrupt. And of course, on your equals key, we have the standard break free. So that's it for the action bar, guys. Let's go ahead and discuss K alerts briefly. So I have quite a few that I track here. We'll go ahead and edit layout so I can show you. Starting at the bottom left here, you can see we have Soul Sickness and the Fiery Burst, which are both single target damage over time abilities there. They're just simply going to have a timer to let you know how long they have. Moving on down here, I offset these just a little bit just to kind of give them a little bit of extra, I guess, flair there. We have the Flamespear, and then we also have the Direct Corruption damage over time abilities there, and that's specifically because these both work for single target and AoE, and same thing with Direct Corruption, single target and AoE. Moving up here, we have a little bit bigger of a Kaler in Frost Strike. This is a really important skill to keep up because it increases your elemental strike damage by 30%. So that's pretty important there. And then same thing with Riff Strike. This is going to increase your non-physical damage by 25%. So you want to make sure you keep both of those buffs up most of the time. And I'll explain the usage in the rotation section. Moving up top here, probably the most important part about this build is going to be your burst charges. So whenever you hit a burst, a burst finisher, it's going to give you one charge of that, and it's going to allow you to do that damage that it lists in the tooltip. However, if you use burst synergy, it's going to give you 3 charges instead of 1. So how we track this is we have the 3 different single target bursts here. So whenever you use a burst, it'll pop up here and show you, hey, you have 1 charge that you're about to use to apply to this enemy. And if you have burst synergy, it tells you that you have the 3 charges. So this is just kind of a way that I track how many different charges I have when I'm using the bursts with Riftblade. Moving up to the top, of course, this is the same kind of thing, except for this is the AoE version. So this will tell you how many charges you have of your Earth Burst and your Storm Burst. So pretty straightforward stuff there, guys. That's it for the K alerts. Now I'll go ahead and discuss how to play Riftblade.
The single target rotation for Riftblade is actually pretty easy. It's all based around a 15-second rotation block. So with that said, we'll go ahead and get started. Looking at the top here, you see I've already preloaded 3 attack points. The way that you can do that is you can swap to your Tempest spec, and you can use an ability called Storm Torrent, facing away from any mobs or anything, of course. And that'll help you gain your 3 attack points before the fight starts. Once that's done, you can swap back over to Riftblade and make sure that you get all your buffs back on and then you're ready to go. So we're going to go and start this out. The way you're going to do this is you're going to hit your Icy Burst macro twice to preload your Icy Burst and your power manipulation. What this does for you is get that 20% non-physical damage increase going for you. So we're going to go ahead and do that, and then we're going to go straight into Frost Strike, and then Rift Strike, and then spam Fiery Burst, Flamespear on 3, Soul Sickness on 3, Stonespear on 1, and then to our burst with QQ, and then spam button 3 times to an Icy Burst, and then a 1-point Icy Burst, and back to E for Frost Strike, 1 for Rift Strike, spam, shift 1 for Fire Burst, Flamespear on 3, Soul Sickness on 3, Stonespear, and then Rift Burst back into spam 3 times, and then Icy Burst, and then 1-point Icy Burst back to E, Rift Strike, spam Fiery Burst, Flamespear, Soul Sickness, Stonespear, bursts back up, use it twice, then 3 spam buttons. And then a 3-point Icy Burst, followed by a 1-point Icy Burst, and then a Frost Strike, Rift Strike, spam Fiery, Flamespear, Soul Sickness, Stonespear, Rift Burst. So you can see it's just a 15-second block, pretty easy to do. We're going to hit the spam button 3 times here, shift 1 for Icy Burst, and then a 1-point Icy Burst back to Frost Strike again, Rift Strike, spam shift 1 for Fiery Burst, Flamespear, Soul Sickness, Stonespear, then back bursts back up, so 3 spam buttons, and then 3-point Icy Burst, and then 1-point Icy Burst. Back to Frost Strike again. And we could keep going, guys. You can see we're at like 54, 3 or something. I did a couple earlier, and they were anywhere between 54 to 56 is usually where I landed after about 3 minutes of concentrated rotation doing. So that's what you got to look forward to. That's it for the single target rotation, guys. Now we'll move on to the Cleave rotation.
The Riftblade Cleave rotation is actually pretty simple. The main thing that changes here is that instead of using a bunch of single target burst finishers, you're going to be using area of effect burst finishers. The other part of this is you're also going to have your fork toggled on here, and you're going to be able to use your Rift Spear for a really good DPS gain as well. So let's go ahead and see what this looks like. You're going to want to preload your attack points before the fight, just like you would with the single target rotation. And then once that's done, you're going to swap back and make sure that you rebuff. Once you're buffed, you're going to use your Preload Macro here for Icy Burst. The reason for this is because you want to get that 20% non-physical damage increase up. So we're going to make sure that we preload that, and then we're going to go ahead and use a Frost Strike, then Rift Strike, Direct Corruption, Shift 2 for the burst, and Flamespear on 3, Soul Sickness on 3, Rift Spear into the burst, so QQ twice, then spam 3 times. And then you're going to use a Shift 2 for the finisher, then a 1-point finisher, back to E for Frost Strike, Rift Strikes on spam button, another spam button, Shift 2, Flamespear, Soul Sickness, Stonespear, Rift Burst, spam 3 times. Once you're done with the third point there, you're going to use a 1-point finisher again, back to Frost Strike, Rift Strike, spam button, Shift 2, Flamespear,
Soul Sickness, Stonespear, Rift Burst, and you're going to use your spam macro 3 more times. Then shift 2, 1, shift 1, E, and then back to your spam macro twice. Shift 2, Flamespear again, Soul Sickness, back to your 2 key, and then use your finisher, spam 3 more times. Shift 2, 1, shift 1, back to Frost Strike, and your spam again. So pretty simple, guys. You can see it's the same block over and over again. Very easy to do, very good numbers. You're going to use your spam 3 more times here, and then you're going to use a shift 2, and then a 1, shift 1, back to E again. So you can see we ended about like 71 to 72k or something for 2 target cleave, which is actually really good considering we also did a majority of this damage to the primary target, which is typically going to be what you want to do as a Riftblade. Most of the time when you're playing Riftblade, you're going to be trying to do damage to a primary target, and you're going to be cleaving adds or other mobs and stuff that are around that target. That's most of the time when you're going to be using Riftblade, so that's going to be your goal. But that's it for the 2 target cleave, guys. Now we'll go ahead and talk about the full-blown AoE rotation. The Riftblade AoE rotation is actually much simpler than the single target and the cleave rotation even, and the reason for that is because you're operating primarily out of your 2 key and using shift 2 to consume 3 attack points. That's kind of your builder finisher setup right there. Aside from that, you're going to be maintaining the buff from Rift Strike, the dot here as Flamespear, and you're also going to be making sure that you're using Riff Storm off cooldown as well as your burst energy on R off cooldown. So we'll go ahead and see what that looks like. I've already preloaded the attack points here with Tempest, so we're good to go there. So we're going to start off by using our Storm Burst. So we're going to go ahead and do a shift 2 followed by a 1, then a 2 for Direct Corruption, 2 for Rift Spear, and then 4 for Rift Storm, and 3 for Flamespear. And then you're going to use your 2 macro twice, and then go immediately into your burst with 2 R's, and then 2 macro 3 more times, and then shift 2. And you're going to keep going, watching these 3 buffs, and watching for this guy to come up. So like right now, we have our Rift Strike coming up, so we're going to make sure we get that guy, and then we just shift 2. And then we have about 8 seconds before Rift Storm comes back up, so we're going to need to use that here pretty soon. Our Direct Corruption will automatically be managed by our macro here, so we're going to go ahead and do that. Use 1 more, refresh our Flamespear, and then use our Rift Storm. And keep going. And we're going to refresh Rift Strike with 1, go to the 3rd combo point, and then our attack point, and then keep going with 2 after we use our burst. Now you can see we're roughly in the high 190s or so, mid 190s area there. So pretty good, decent for being a good single target, good cleave, and good AoE soul. It's very similar to like how Nightblade would play, I would say. So, but pretty straightforward, guys. You can see after a minute we're in the mid 180s. Pretty strong stuff. Really strong spec. I definitely recommend that you save a roll slot for it. But that's it, guys. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment sections. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And I will see you guys next time.